welcome everybody. You got Jack and Larson here with another episode of Après Sales. Thank you all for joining us here today. And today the topic of discussion is we're really talking a bit more about the importance of a workflow integration as it pertains to user activation. I'm not the product guy here, so I'm a bit lost. So Jack, why don't you start us off before we get into everything, of course. I want to hear more about this. Before we get into this, what are you drinking on this afternoon?
Yeah, same as last week. Modelo in the office, but I love it. How about you? Switching it up a little bit.
I am switching it up a little bit today. I am. So brought to you today by Blue Moon. It's great beer. So cheers, buddy. It's been a great week, very productive week.
Yeah, awesome.
So let's get going here. So give me some more context here. You kind of prompted us on this idea. I know you got a lot to talk about here, but I'm not the product guy. Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by this.
Yeah, it's kind of a mouthful, right? Workflow integration for user activation. Why was this on the top of our mind today? Previously, we were DemoFlow. When we started that company and that product, we started as a desktop application, which afforded us a lot of really important technical reasons and like advantages over other solutions in the market to build and present complex product demos. But what it didn't do well is fit into the user's workflow. People had to download this desktop application and then remember to use it, make a conscious decision to use this as a very different behavior change from the previous way they'd run product demos. And it was really hard to activate users. It just was, right? And we had a lot of challenges with that. And we worked on that for a while, trying to get around it, making it easier to download, deep linking into the application, things like that. But ultimately, it came until the release of Zoom apps. Nice shirt today, by the way. Zoom apps that really underscored this point for us, I think. You know, we were fortunate enough to be in the first batch of Zoom apps released, one of the launch partners there, and it forced us to look at the whole user workflow and was actually integral for us actually eventually pivoting the company and changing our product offering. But what we immediately realized as part of it was the importance of, or how critical and advantageous this was going to be for us to be where the user already is. The user's already, especially 1 to 2 years ago, in Zoom meetings all the time. And so to be right where they are, one click away from where they already are, that the behavior change to get into the application and get value from it was so much easier. And it was game changing for us, right? Like to get in and just be where the user is just so essential for a product today, at least at the beginning, like to get that initial value realization moment.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, obviously, I've been on this journey with you for a long time now. I remember the very early days, like desktop app, we ran into security issues, the work to download it, there's an installed package on your client. Like it was so much work just to get users in, up to speed, adopted, configured, just to get to these magic moments that they're the whole reason what we're trying to solve. So it just forced us to rethink about how are users experiencing our product, what are the pieces that we're bringing to the forefront here. And Zoom really sparked a lot of change in terms of how we think about our product and what are the pieces that we're going to be bringing a user to the forefront and what are they experiencing first, second, third, and just being way more integrated into that workflow. But I'm curious, Jack, so like after all this, like what do we do? What did it prompt us to do? Because I know we made a lot of changes thereafter.
Yeah, well, at the core, right, we moved away from being so presentation focused in the application to be more meeting based and meeting agnostic to be useful on any sales conversation that you're on. And so that was like a huge product focus change for sure. But it also it was a fun challenge to fit an application into the form factor that Zoom apps allows, at least the in-meeting form factor of that right-hand sidebar. That was actually a form factor we had already kind of used a little bit in our previous application in our what we called the private meeting dashboard. But what that built then on top of it is we took that even further, right? We eventually, fully moved away from the desktop application. We were able to work in the Zoom apps, but then we used that underlying infrastructure to build our web app and browser extension to even more facilitate being right in the user's workflow. So now a user that gets on board, they just knock out their few integrations that they need to do with us. We're basically everywhere they could want to be. If you're running meetings out of your Google Calendar or Outlook calendar, the extension automatically prompts you to use the platform from there. If you're in a Zoom meeting, we're one click away from the apps menu. Those types of things just make it 1,000 times easier to get people on and activated. And it's kind of funny. Like I remember years ago, we would almost try to justify ourselves why, people are going to make that behavior change because it's so worth it once they make that change, it's like such a better experience. And while that can work for people, for sure it can, I'll always catch myself if I ever think of that again. Like, oh, but if they do change, it'll be so worth it. It's like, no, it's not.
Yeah.
You might be right, but more often than not, I think that's a fool's errand, if you will, to go down that path. Try to be where they are to really capture it and make the behavior change minimal and easy.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, what there are multiple pieces you have to remember when it comes to, especially when you're working B2B, right? An individual user buying, one product as an individual user, yeah, they can change behaviors, but we're talking about the masses. We're talking about a whole entire team here, and how a business buys products isn't by individual end users. It's not always the case. Like sometimes that can happen, but usually there's somebody that's training and reinforcing, implementing. So the ease of use, the embedded into workflows, like all these are so critical. And frankly, this is where we've seen some of the impact. I mean, not only just in our sales cycle, so it helps us to, justify why it'll be easier to access, reduce concerns around activation and the onboarding pieces, of course, but we're actually seeing that. Like we're actually seeing that uptick in terms of adoption in the product and in our user base. And so we're getting that feedback, we're seeing the numbers, and it's kind of allowing this full story to come to fruition here. So it really has changed and had a pretty substantial impact across the board in terms of how we think about going to market.
Yeah, and you a little not really glossed over it, but I think it's so important to underscore of like what you said is I think, coming from the not sales world originally myself, one piece I was a little surprised about, and it totally makes sense, but I was a little surprised about it was in the sales cycles, having the leaders so concerned with how product adoption was going to be if they purchased Gondola, right? And makes total sense now, right? If you're going to pay a bunch of money for something, you want people to use it. But maybe can you talk a little bit more about like that aspect, how important the like adoption is for leadership?
Certainly, yeah, of course. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise that there's just a lot of SaaS technology out there, and specific to sales, there's a ton of marketing tools, a ton of sales technology out there. And for our solution in particular, it's not one or two people that are using it and getting the impact on the back half. It can be 50, it can be 100, it's the masses. So those pieces are always top of mind. And I think a lot of people we work with have been burned by solutions that they've picked up because they wanted to get the impact of this, but they didn't maybe focus on the onboarding, activation, ease of use, workflow pieces historically in the back. And now they're just like, this is so important to us because we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on tools that just see a little bit of uptick and then it plummets and people go back to the way they're used to doing things. And so there's a very legitimate, argument that we can make now. It's like, hey, what screen share solution do you go into every single time, right? You going into Zoom? Okay, got it. It's right there. Just go down here, click on it. It'll pop it right open, bring you right in the meeting, bring all the things up that they need to. And so we're just reducing as much work that is necessary to get to these moments of kind of value realization.
Yeah, I love it. And I think, one of the pieces that I've realized as a shift, I think, in the market as tools have gotten so much better, right? Of course, everyone wants to be embedded in the workflow and how important it is to be adopted well is really just shortening the time to value that you mentioned there, that time to value or time to value realization moment to basically zero. Or another, like we've talked about time to value, but you actually said earlier today, one I really liked, which is effort to value. Thought that was an interesting tweak on it. Because if it takes a little bit to get value, if you need to run reporting daily or whatever that might be, or it's not instantaneous, okay. But what's that effort it's going to take me or my team to get to the value? And that, I honestly think the expectation is that my only effort I should need to put in is to pay you for the solution. And then beyond that, I better get value out of it. And then if I do, I can go further in the workflow and I can do a little bit more and I'll put in a little more work on my end. But I really think the expectation has shifted to basically, I signed the contract and I better get value immediately from this, purchase. Do you feel that way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we're seeing that more and more and more with, the emergence of product-led growth companies and a lot of people trying to take that stance as to get users in, get them activated all on their own. Even if that's not the full go-to-market motion, they want to experience that. They need those pieces embedded as, even if you're not true product-led growth, you need to make sure that it's easy to onboard, adopt, because companies are bringing on more and more people. The turnover can happen. There's new people coming in. So even if it's not a go-to-market motion, it still needs to be. It's really a blend between what is the effort I have to do to get to the value. I'd also throw in there, what's my pain associated with that? It's like an equation of these three things. If my pain's super high, I might be willing to put in some more effort to get to that value on the back half. But if my pain's super low and the work's really high, that's a bad equation right there, and that's not really going to go super well from a product and adoption standpoint.
That's a great point. I'm sure. I feel like it's on the tip of my tongue, one of the frameworks for that type of like pain analysis as well. But I think, someone we've referenced before, one of our favorite vendors, Strata, their SOC 2 compliance software, and I guess compliance software beyond SOC 2, all sorts of different things. But you're right, the pain is like up here. And yeah, we had to do a lot of work. We had to do a lot of work to get the value out of that. But the pain was so high and the value of having the end result was so high that the work was worth it. So you're right there. We'll follow up on that on another one of some chart or rubric like that, because I'm sure that exists, and if not, we'll make it.
Certainly. And Jack, I think we've had kind of a handful of focuses that have so we've talked about like where we started, what caused us to change and our product to change, and what we've learned from all these pieces. But I'd love to distill this down. We talked about one of them in terms of like core focuses as we thought about the importance of workflow integration as it pertains to user activation. The first one we talked about is time to value realization. How much time does it take me to get to these moments? How much work do I have to put in? But I think the other thing that we've talked about in the past is, well, how do you reduce work, right? How do you make it easier to get to those moments? And what we've frankly done a much better job of is, well, let's do the click mapping and the workflows ourselves. And what pieces are absolutely essential? What can we remove by way of just clicks? Do you have to go to that filter? Do you have to apply that thing? Is there any ways that you can be smarter about how users are getting in and getting to those moments? I know we've been really, really focused on that. And you've been a big driver of this, is like, how do we remove key pieces from this to make it faster to get to those moments there?
Yeah, that's a great one. And I think paired with that is the empty room problem. So the more you can bring, like when they create their account, what can you do within 5 seconds, basically, so that they don't show up in an empty room, whether that's templates for your application, a first report based on the integrations you do, whatever that might be. But yeah, the time, the clicks, and then the time to like not just be in an empty room, I think is really good. And one of the other ones I want to bring up is just taking inspiration from the market. Like, I don't know about, well, I kind of do know about you. We use a ton of sales tools, or software tools all over, right? Like in every facet of business, but in personal life too. And I'm always looking at every user workflow I go through to start with a new platform or invite someone to a platform. What is that like? And we just keep a collection, in Slack for us, of like all the different experiences we've loved to take inspiration from the market. So taking inspiration from the market is another great one too.
Certainly. Yeah, I completely agree. And when something, it feels really great, you go, oh, wow. You get the little like, oh, wow moments, like, wow, that really just happened. Like, you're almost like subtly surprised yourself at how it's almost like the software knew where you wanted to go and got you there faster. And like, that's such an important thing. I think another core focus that we've had is being ubiquitous. So that's where Zoom apps comes into play. That's where counter integration comes into play. That's where our Chrome extension comes into play. We want to be everywhere. We want to be, know your workflows deeply, but be in every corner of where that is, and just naturally kind of pop up and be like, hey, would you want to use us when you're already jumping into a Zoom meeting, automatically opening that up? So we've done a much better job of being more ubiquitous and kind of everywhere throughout this entire process.
Yeah. I think the last thing I'll say is just one thing you just said there at the end. That's really the root of it, what you just said. How can you make your software feel like it's reading your users' minds in a non-intrusive way? Like, if you can give an experience where people get in there and they feel like, oh, you knew exactly what I was doing and when I was about to do it, and you presented me the solution just in time, and this couldn't be easier for me. That's gold standard.
Indeed. Well, Jack, on that note, cheers. What we talked about in this one is just, hey, the importance of, workflow integration as it pertains to user activation. We talked about reducing clicks, being cautious of what is the pain your user is experiencing, what is the work to get to the value moments there, and then how do you remove clicks, the work involved there, taking inspiration from the market. But it's something that if you're looking at starting up a product or starting a startup, be very cautious of this, being deeply integrated into users' workflow, and that can really do a lot for you in terms of user activation. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers.
Cheers.